بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله أما بعد فإن أحسن الكلام كلام الله وخير الهدى هدى محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم وإن شر الأمور محدثاتها وكل محدثة بدعة وكل بدعة ضلالة وكل ضلالة في النار. So this is lesson 59, the 59th lesson, inshallah the last lesson in our series on the book Al-Uboodiyyah of Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah. In the last lesson we started doing basically just a summary of the entire book in the form of maybe 6 or so points, and we got halfway through in the previous lesson. The things that we covered in the previous lesson, first of all, the first point that the book deals with in response to 4 questions. There were 4 questions. What is worship? What is its definition? What are its branches? Is all of the religion considered worship? Does it enter into worship? Secondly. Thirdly, what's the reality of this ubudiyyah, this servitude that we are speaking of, servitude to Allah, enslavement to Allah? And fourthly, this ubudiyyah, this servitude, is it the greatest ranks and stations in this life and the next? So in response to these 4 questions, Shaykh al-Islam Taymiyyah, he wrote a lengthy treatise, moderate-sized treatise, and within this treatise, he essentially covered the following issues. First of all, the definition of ibadah, the ta'rif of ibadah. Within the book, at the beginning, he gives the well-known definition that worship is a comprehensive term for everything that Allah loves and is pleased with from the statements and actions, whether inward or outward. And later on in the book, he discusses the issue. So that's one definition. And the other definition is كمال الحب مع كمال الذل, or غاية الحب مع غاية الذل, which means where you combine between the perfection of love and the perfection of humility, submissiveness. Right? When these 2 things come together in the heart, this then is what is worship. You can't have one with the other. Obedience without love is not worship. Right? So for example, the Fir'aun, as is in fact mentioned in the Quran, Musa alayhi salam, he said to Fir'aun, because Fir'aun was basically recounting some of the favors he'd done upon Musa alayhi salam. So Musa alayhi salam, he responded to him and said that this favor you're trying to impress upon me as if I owe you something. What did you do in return for that? Did you an abadta bani Israel, that you enslaved Bani Israel? So he used the word abadta, right? Which obviously is from the word abd, ubudiyyah. So here, enslavement in itself, just being forced to be a slave to someone, that is not worship, unless it's done out of love. And similarly, mere love by itself is not worship, unless there is with it obedience, compliance and humility, right? So one definition basically is a very broad umbrella type definition that covers all of the various types and forms of worship, right? That's the definition Ibn Taymiyyah has given. And another definition explains to us really the internal reality of what worship is, right, as it occurs in the heart and what follows on from it. So these 2 definitions, when you bring these 2 together, they really bring together the essence and the reality of worship, of ibadah as a whole. That was the first point we discussed in the previous lesson. Second point that Ibn Taymiyyah discusses is generally the importance and the status of this worship. Right? It's the purpose for which Allah created us It is that by which we attain perfection, in human character and so on and so forth. And there were some other things that we discussed as well. So that was generally, there was many other things we discussed, but that's point number 2 in essence. Point number 3 is that on this basis we can now divide the people of the earth. Right? There are different ways we can divide the people of the earth. Like there's the believer, there's the mu'min, or the Muslim, the mu'min, the kafir and the hypocrite. Right? So there's various ways, but one of the ways in relation to this topic is that we say that there are some people who are slaves of Allah in the universal creational sense. In fact, that's everybody. Right? So whether you're a Jew, Christian, Muslim, atheist, Buddhist, Hindu, you are all subjected to the laws of Allah in His creation. Right? There's no preference for anybody. If you jump off a building, you will die just as if an atheist jumps off a building. There's no difference. Right? You will be burned by fire just like, an atheist will be burned by the fire. Right? There's no difference in the worldly sense. So in this sense, everybody is an everything and everybody, everything that we see, the sun, the moon, the stars, the tree, everything, the animals, everything is an abd of Allah in that sense, right? In that sense that we are subjected to Allah's laws, creational laws. Then there is an abd in the legislative sense, in terms of the Sharia, what the Sharia wants from us, right? And this is the one who comes to Allah, obviously having believed in Him, in His Uboodiyyah, and who obeys Him, and who abides by His commands, and keeps away from His prohibitions. This person now has become an abd in the Sharia sense, right? In the legislative sense. And this is what Allah Azza wa Jal loves and is pleased with, right? That we become an abd in the legislative Sharia sense. Otherwise, it's not enough just to acknowledge and recognize that you are an abd, because otherwise Iblis would be a believer, right? Iblis, he knows Allah is his Lord, he knows that Allah is the Rabb of everything. This mere acknowledgement or this mere knowledge does not make him a believer, right? So that because there are some people who basically claim that to be a Muslim, in fact to be a monotheist, a muwahhid, all you need to know is that Allah is the Lord, creator, owner, provider, sustainer, regulator of everything. And this is false. And they even say that so long as you believe this, then you can't really fall into shirk. Right? And shirk does not take place, even if you do an act of shirk, if you call upon someone besides Allah, if you seek aid from someone besides Allah, so long as you believe only Allah is the creator, owner, provider, sustainer, then that's not really shirk until you believe that. This is totally false. This is the argument of the grave worshippers that's been revived by some people. It's always said by people, but it's been revived today by some people. So the claim that you become a Muslim just by acknowledging the creatorship of Allah, the lordship of Allah, this is completely false. This is not true. Otherwise, Iblis would be a believer, and in fact, the Jews would be believers, the Christians would be believers, even the Hindus believe in an overall supreme deity. They believe in one supreme deity, and obviously they have other deities below that. So this is not the Islam that the prophets and messengers came with. They came with ubudiyyah to Allah alone. So that's in terms of dividing the servants of Allah. That was the second point. The third point, that was the third point. The fourth point is the one that we started discussing in the previous lesson. And this is the fact that people, they went astray and they can go astray in this issue of ubudiyyah. We mentioned that there's a sequence that takes place and of 4 or 5 steps. And it's possible for someone to be misguided at any stage in these 4 or 5 steps. So for example, we start off with the realization that everything is enslaved to Allah. This is al-Uboodiyyah al-Kawniyah, right? We see that everything is in servitude to Allah. Everything follows certain laws. No one can escape. And so everyone is a servant in that respect. We start off with that knowledge. This is from the fitrah, right? We know, we know, and we can see this through aql, through reason, through fitrah, through just intuitive knowledge, through observation. So from here, we are obligated to believe in Allah and to follow the messengers, follow the books, and we've been given choice and will and ability to act. So second step here is that we choose to act, right? We follow the Sharia, which leads us thirdly to do good deeds and keep away from the evil deeds, right? But it doesn't just stop there, because this goodness and this that we are upon, then we are also commanded to enjoin the good and prohibit the evil, fourthly. And because we've been commanded to do that, it also follows on from that we have to also love and hate on the basis of this truth, right? Because some people are not going to follow the guidance, and some people are going to follow the guidance. So there has to be a criterion, and there has to be something that separates, right? Otherwise, it doesn't make sense if you have to worship Allah alone, and then you have to show the same love to a person of Tawheed as you have to a person of idol worship. It just doesn't make sense, because these feelings of the heart are traced back and based upon certain beliefs. So it's a it's a contradiction. It doesn't. It's not possible for that to exist. So for that reason, the point being that in this sequence of events, it's possible for people to make a mistake and err in any one of these 4 or 5 stages. And Ibn Taymiyyah, he discusses some of this in his book. He discusses some of these issues in his book. And so from the issues that he mentioned, and we covered this in the previous lesson, is that some people, they do not distinguish between Allah's qadar and Allah's sharia, right? They thought that everything that Allah decrees, He automatically loves it. And this is incorrect. Allah only loves what He commands by way of His legislation. That's what He loves, which is whatever is wajib and whatever is mustahab. As for whatever He allows to happen in His creation, He allows many things to happen in His creation, right? There is shirk taking place, there is kufr taking place, there is murder, drinking, gambling, fornicating, there's all sorts of cheating, lying, steal, all these things take place. But just because it is from His qadar does not mean that He is pleased with it. So some people fail to distinguish between the sharia and qadar, and they believe Allah is pleased and happy with everything that happens because He willed it. And this is complete misguidance, and it leads to even greater misguidance. He also discussed how some people, in terms of al-qadar, they believe that we are basically without free will. We don't really do our actions. It's Allah who is doing the actions through us, through our bodies, right? And it's not really us who are doing the actions. And this is the saying of the Jahmiyyah and the Jabariyah and the Sufiyah, some of the extreme Sufis. They spoke with the likes of this statement. And what this really means, if you combine all of these two things together, it really means that it means that everything that happens is praiseworthy, and all religions are basically correct, because a Christian's only worshipping the way Allah willed him to worship. And it leads, these mistakes here lead to very, very evil consequences. And this actually happened in history, and those people who speak with the likes of these things, they are present today. So I think this is the point where we finished with in the last lesson. Basically, I think we finished on the point where the way that people can go astray is in one of two ways. Either, and this is the way of the polytheists who are mentioned in the Quran, you either try to justify your actions by way of al-qadr, right? So you use al-qadr as an argument, right? For your disbelief, for your shirk, for your sin, for your disobedience. That's the first thing. And the second thing is that you innovate into the religion. You bring bid'ah into the religion, that which is not from it, or you change or you alter the legislation of Allah Azza wa Jal. So I think that's the point we finished on in the previous lesson. So we'll continue from this point after that, recap of the last lesson. So also from the mistakes, this is still point number 4. Also from the mistakes is that some of these people who believed some of these ideas, what they did is that they did the acts, the obligatory acts, right? And they did the acts of obedience, and they left things which were haram, but they did not use any of the means, the asbab, to aid themselves and support themselves, in worship or the world, right? In other words, the whole issue of tawakkul, reliance, like you make dua to Allah or you take the means, they abandoned them, they didn't do any of them. Because they believe that whatever Allah has decreed is going to come to you, irrespective of whether you take the ways or means or not. So they didn't really adopt any of the asbab. So they didn't say, for example, oh Allah, give me sustenance, right? Or Allah, they didn't ask for any of their needs, make dua for any of that, because they believed that this would kind of be opposed to al-qadr, right? It would contradict al-qadr to make these kind of supplications. So therefore, what they did is that they abandoned these means, and they said that this is really just the way of the common people. It's not for the elite people to, make dua to Allah for these things, or to use the ways and means, the asbab, to achieve your needs. This is the way of the common people. And as for us, then we worship Allah, we'll do what is wajib, we'll keep what is haram, and after that, whatever comes to us from al-qadr, it'll come to us. And we don't need to take, any of these, like making dua, like making tawakkul itself. And, so they thought that this is belief in al-qadr. You understand? They thought that this is what it means to believe in al-qadr. That you don't take any of the ways and means, you resign to whatever comes from al-qadr. And so this obviously means that they wouldn't take any of the ways and means, they wouldn't make dua to Allah. And this again is a faulty understanding of al-qadr, once again. And you can see how a faulty understanding in al-qadr can also impact your worship. It can impact your worship. If you have these wrong ideas, then it can affect your worship. And as we know, Allah Azza wa Jalla, He said in the Quran, فَاعْبُدْهُ وَتَوَكَّلْ عَلَيْهِ. فَاعْبُدْهُ وَتَوَكَّلْ عَلَيْهِ. Worship Allah and place your reliance upon Him. So He added a tawakkul. He said, rely upon Allah. And reliance upon Allah, obviously, it is to, take the means and leave the result to Allah Azza wa Jal. And then there were some other people as well. They worshipped Allah only with that which is wajib and not the mustahab. Right? So they said, we'll do what is wajib, and as for what is, mustahab, what is, we won't do any of that. Anyway, the point being that in this topic, if you have underlying mistakes in issues of belief, like, for example, al-qadr and things like that, it can lead you to these deviations in your worship of Allah Azza wa Jal. and eventually lead you, even as we discussed before, that it can even lead you to fail to distinguish between Allah Himself and the creation itself, right? Through a series of steps, once you start making these mistakes. Anyway, that's point number 4. And point number 5 takes up a large portion of the book, and this is, in general, we can summarize that whole section as the issue of at-tafadul bil-iman. At-tafadul bil-iman, which means that the believers, they vary with each other in terms of their iman. Right? All of the believers, their iman is not at the same level. There's a variation. Some people excel, are better, are superior. Other people, this variation exists. And what's the basis of this variation between the believers? It is in the issue of uboodiyyah. Not everybody is a slave to Allah Azza wa Jal in the same way. Right? Not everybody has the same level of servitude to Allah Azza wa Jal. And what we find is that because the heart of a person can have different types of attachments, people have different types of attachments in their lives, and they are put to trial by the heart's attachment to other things besides Allah, then not everybody is going to have the same level of ubudiyyah. Right? So from the things that Ibn Taymiyyah, he discusses, for example, things which are from the heart, where the heart becomes, turns away from Allah. For example, is ar-riya, which is showing off. Doing deeds to show off. Doing acts of worship to show off, to be seen of other people. Right? To give charity so people say, isn't he generous? To pray in the mosque, the nawafil prayers, to be seen, so that people look and see, oh, this is a good worshipper, right? This is ar-riya. So here the heart has an attachment to other than Allah. It's trying to please other than Allah, right? This is one form. Another form is the heart's love and attachment and servitude to wealth. So the hadith, Ta'isa Abdul Dirham, perish or ruined or wretched is the worshipper of the dirham. Worshipper. Right? Meaning the one whose heart is attached to wealth. This is another thing that many people are put to trial with. Their hearts are attached to wealth, and that wealth diverts them from their obligations and their duties to Allah Azza wa Jal. Right? Likewise, there are shahawat. The third thing, shahawat. There are lusts, desires that people are put to trial with. The fulfillment of their lusts and desires. That's the third one. Attachment, to women or to men, vice versa to men. Fourthly, power. There are some people who seek power and their hearts are attached or enslaved by power or authority or leadership, all similar things. Also, another form where this exists is where a person is in need of and dependent on other people for his subsistence. Right? So basically we are speaking of things like when a person, he like almost begs, and if he doesn't beg, he's like kind of, he's always dependent and his heart is attached to other people, wanting his needs to be fulfilled by way of them, right? So all of these things that we mentioned, these 5 or 6 things, people are put to trial with these things. And their hearts become attached to these things to different degrees, different levels, and as a result, they are taken away from servitude to Allah, ubudiyyah to Allah, and instead taken to ubudiyyah to other than Allah. Right? This is something that happens. Every believer is put to trial by way of these things. And so the point being is, where does the trial and the tribulation start from? Right? In being put to trial with servitude to other than Allah. It begins with at-tama'. At-tama' means that in your heart there is a want or a desire for something, right? So if in your heart there is the want or the desire for these things, you seek these things, then by necessity you will be led to be enslaved to other than Allah. But if your tama', your want and your aspiration and your desire is for Allah and His bounty and His mercy and His reward, right? That's what you are seeking. You're seeking the hereafter. That's the only thing you seek. You will not be enslaved by other things. You will not be enslaved by other than Allah Azza wa Jal. And that's why there was a statement that was mentioned, استغني عمن شئت تكن نظيره وأفضل إلى من شئت تكن أميره واحتج إلى من شئت تكن أسيره. Which means that if you are free of need and free of want from other people, from whomever you will, then you will be his equal, right? Meaning that if you become self-reliant and you don't depend upon other people, and you're not in need of them, you will then become the equal to that person. You will be his equal, nadhir. And if you show bounty and favor to whomever you will then become his amir. You will become the one who is his leader, right? And be in need of whomever you will, and you will be his captive. You will be his captive, right? So there are three states here. The first one is that if you become free of need of those besides you, meaning that you don't depend upon them or rely upon them or be in need of them for your subsistence, your provision, your needs and so on and so forth, you will be an equal to that person, right? It's not like a slave or a master relationship. And if you yourself are the one who is bountiful and bestowing upon other people, then basically you are their amir. You are their amir. And if you are the one who is in need of other people, then you are their captive. You are their asir. Right? What this shows is that obviously as servants of Allah, we have interactions with each other by necessity. Obviously we have to interact with each other, even to the degree that, we have wives, husbands, children, relatives, whatever. We all have interactions with other people. Within those interactions, then these kind of scenarios or situations can exist, right? You can either always be in need of other people, or you can be free of need of other people, right? And that in turn will then, affect your status. Are you truly a servant of Allah? Is your heart truly, reliant only upon Allah, dependent only upon Allah, attached only to Allah, right? So you can see that these issues here, they are issues in which the believers, they will vary a great deal. And every time the heart increases in its attachment to other than Allah, it will become an abd of them or of those things, and that will take him away from his uboodiyyah to Allah. And every time a servant's heart increases in its attachment to Allah, then his uboodiyyah will also increase to that degree, right? This is something that returns back to the heart. And that's why Ibn Taymiyyah mentioned a very important point, which is that sometimes you can observe and see people, you might think that they are the leader or the master, but in reality they are the slave. This can happen in relations between a husband and wife, where, for example, a man is held captive by a woman, he is supposed to be the one who is in charge, but because of, he's captivated by her, she is the one who basically controls him and, moves him here and there, right? Similarly, a leader, Ra'is or Amir, right? He appears to be the one in power, but really, he is the one who is in need of for example, his ministers, the military, and he fears them, right? Because he knows that they could take power from him and whatever else. So although he appears to be in charge, it's really other people who are in charge, right? So he does things, and those things are to please other people, even though outwardly when we look, we see that, it appears to be that he's the one who is in power. So these are just some of the realities that relate to the servitude of the heart, right? Everything returns back originally to the heart, and reward and punishment is on the basis of what is in the heart, right? What starts off in the heart. And as Ibn Taymiyyah said, the hurriya, the freedom, is really the freedom of the heart, and the uboodiyyah is really the uboodiyyah of the heart, which is why you can have, for example, a man, a believer, who is imprisoned or he's put in chains. So even though outwardly he appears to be a captive, inwardly he is completely free. He has complete freedom of the heart, right? Because his heart is enslaved only to Allah, right? So whether he's thrown in prison, or whether he's put in chains, whether he's tied to, whatever, that's only on the surface. Conversely, you can have someone who appears to be totally free, but he's completely enslaved with the heart, in terms of the heart. And this is what you see with the kuffar and the mushrikeen. They are either enslaved to their idols, or they're enslaved to their lusts, to their desires, or to material things, or to, people, right? They're completely captivated and enslaved, in terms of the heart. So it's the heart which is either free or which is enslaved. Now, as we said, everything really begins with the heart. And one of the things that Ibn Taymiyyah spoke of a lot is the issue of love, mahabba, right? Because mahabba is a very important part of ubudiyyah, because the moment there is any type of love in the heart automatically starts moving, right? This is the nature of the heart. The moment the heart is filled with love of anything, it automatically, naturally moves towards that thing. Which means that, the love of the heart should be for Allah Azza wa Jal. Its attachment should be for Allah Azza wa Jal. And like we said, from the muqtada, from the necessity of love in the heart, is that outwardly, there are certain, statements, there are certain actions that automatically follow as soon as the heart is filled with love. This is just basically the fitrah of man. This is how man has been created, right? So we'll discuss that a bit more, inshallah, shortly. But first of all, Ibn Taymiyyah mentions that when we look at man, we see that his needs are of two types. The first of those needs are those which, things which you actually need, right? Which is food, sustenance, shelter, like basically needs that everybody needs. These things are sought from Allah. You seek these things from Allah, you rely upon Allah, and if you have any wealth, you use that wealth for whatever you need, right? This is sufficiency. The second type is those things that you don't actually need. Like, you don't really need them for your day-to-day survival. It's like something, It's not something that you need. These types of things, if your heart becomes attached to these things which you don't actually need, this then is what starts leading you into servitude to other than Allah Azza wa Jal. Right? So obviously what this means is that seeking wealth itself is not servitude, because obviously there is some wealth that you need. Right? You need wealth to survive. Right? So attachment to that is not what is considered to be ubudiyyah. But attachment to wealth that goes beyond what you need, beyond what is sufficient, and then attachment to that, this is now what enters into ubudiyyah, right? And so this same principle applies to all those other things. There are some things that obviously there are material needs that we all have, right? What we are speaking of is that which a servant, it goes in excess of what a person is actually in need of. This is where he starts entering into ubudiyyah to other than Allah. But all of this starts with love of a thing, right? Love of a thing in the heart. And that's why Ibn Taymiyyah mentioned that from the nature of a human is that when he loves something, when there's mahabba, then there is irada. Right? When there is mahabba, there is irada. Irada means the desire and the wish. And whenever there is a desire and a wish, there is haraka or taharruk, which is motion, right? It's actual motion. This is very, very simple to understand. This applies to food, right? In your mind, you love a certain food, you love a certain item, you love a certain food, right? There's a love, right? Because there's pleasure. When there's love, irada follows. Irada is the desire, the wish. And then when there's desire and wish, there is motion, meaning that you are moved. You are moved to go and seek that thing which you love. This is just the nature of man, how he has been created, how his body works, how his heart works. This is just how it is. And this means, as Ibn Taymiyyah says, that because this is the very nature of man, right, so his heart, in his heart there's either pure love for Allah, in which case there will be a desire and then motion for Allah. It's either that, or if there's love of any other type, then by necessity there will be irada and motion. There will be to whatever that thing is. Right? This is just the nature of the heart itself. Right? So if a mushrik loves his idol, he'll be drawn towards that. Right? If a man loves wealth and power, lust for power, he'll be drawn towards that. Right? So this is how it is. This is just the nature of how the man is, right? The humans are. Whatever the heart is filled with, then the irada and the haraka, the motion of the body, will go towards that thing. Right? So once we know that, then it becomes very clear that if a person is not worshipping Allah alone, then he will be worshipping other than Allah. Very simple, very clear. It starts in the heart. And it starts with mahabba, with love. Right? Mahabba is, as you remember, Ibn Taymiyyah discussed this for quite a while, speaking about mahabba being the asal of worship, foundation of worship itself. It starts with mahabba, because mahabba then creates all of those inward motions and outward motions that lead people to desire things and do things. So, the perfection of ubudiyyah, therefore, kamalul ubudiyyah, is by way of what? Is by way of kamal al-mahabba, the perfection of love. Right? And this love itself has clear signs clear criteria, clear manifestations. And Ibn Taymiyyah spoke about that, he spoke about ittiba. قُلْ إِن كُنْتُمْ تُحِبُّونَ اللَّهَ فَاتَّبِعُونِي. So if you truly love Allah, then follow me. Ittiba, following the messenger, imitating the messenger, is one of the clear manifest signs of true and genuine love of Allah. Right? True and genuine love of Allah, that is. Not the love similar to what the Christians claim, where it's just love and there's no conformity with the legislation. Not that type of love, but a genuine type of love, right? Because this love was claimed by the Jews and the Christians. And this verse was revealed, if you truly love Allah, then follow me. فَاتَّبِعُونِي. Follow me, make ittiba. Right? Also, from the signs of this love is to strive in the path of Allah Azza wa Jal. Right? To strive in the path of Allah Azza wa Jal. So, also from the points that Ibn Taymiyyah mentioned in relation to this as well, is how do the hearts find satisfaction? How do the hearts find satisfaction? How does your heart become at ease, have serenity, have tranquility? It is simple. It is by two things. إِيَّاكَ نَعْبُدُ وَإِيَّاكَ نَسْتَعِينُ. Right? You alone do we worship, and from you alone do we seek aid and assistance. Right? Happiness, serenity lies in these two things. Right? You worship Allah, and then you seek Allah's aid in that worship. And all of tranquility and happiness lies in pursuing these two things. In the absence of these things, you can get every pleasure, every desire, have all the possessions in the world, have everything. You will never ever taste serenity, satisfaction, tranquility. Right? Simply won't get it. This is the basis of tranquility and serenity. And that's why we mentioned also in the lessons how the people of disbelief, materialism, and even amongst the Muslims, who amass tremendous amounts of wealth, tremendous amounts of possessions, have everything, likable thing, yet they first of all, they are enslaved. They are in Uboodiyyah to other than Allah. Secondly, they do not have true tranquility of the heart, because the tranquility lies in these things, So this is another point that Ibn Taymiyyah mentioned. And after that, he also went on to discuss another point about how the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he was perfect in his love of Allah, which is why he had the station of al-khulla. Al-khulla is an intimate type of friendship. Right? It is above the level of mahabba. And this was the case with Ibrahim alayhi salam. But Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam was the greatest messenger, and he was had the khulla, which is the intimate friendship with Allah Azza wa Jal, which is why it's because he actualized ubudiyyah to Allah Azza wa Jal, and the perfection of mahabba, which leads to this khulla, right? The perfection of this intimate friendship with Allah Azza wa Jal. Also from the points he mentioned in relation to this tafadul, this variation between the believers, is that when we speak of love, love is really the starting point. And it has to also be attached to fear and hope. You can't just have love on its own. Right? And we mentioned the statement related from some of the Salaf, Man abadallah bil hub fahuwa zindiq, wa man abadahu bil raja wahdahu fahuwa murji, wa man abadahu bil khawf wahdahu fahuwa haruri, wa man abadahu bil hubbi wal khawfi wal raja fahuwa mu'minun muwahhid. Whoever worshipped Allah with love only, then he is a heretic. Right? So this refers to those people who claim they love Allah and they try to express that love by ways other than following the Sharia. Right? This will lead you to heresy, to misguidance. This is like the Sufis who basically follow the way of the Christians, and they sing songs and do dances and praise the messenger and think this is worship. Right? This is not worship. Worship is to obey the Messenger of Allah and to worship Allah according to how He commanded you through His Messenger. Right? So the claim of love alone, it leads people to go astray in this way, similar to the Christians. Whoever worshipped Allah with hope only, then he is a murji. Murji meaning that he will be someone who will neglect actions. He will belittle actions. He will think Allah's merciful, He's Ar-Rahman, Ar-Rahim, Al-Ghafur, Al-Ghaffar. Right? He's most merciful, most kind, Ar-Ra'uf, most compassionate. He forgives all the time. Right? So he will rely upon Allah's mercy and he will belittle action itself. He will belittle the affair of action. Right? So he will become a murji. A murji is the one who expels actions from Iman. And whoever worships him with fear only, then he is a haruri. Haruri meaning from the Khawarij. Because the Khawarij, they worshipped Allah out of intense, exaggerated fear. Right? So they said, we are doomed, we are going to perish, Allah's never going to forgive us. Right? So they had this mentality. And if you have this mentality, then, it leads you to despair. Right? This also is tremendous misguidance. So not only do we not exaggerate in the issue or the direction of hope, nor do we exaggerate in the direction of fear. We neither despair of Allah's mercy, nor do we put excessive, unfounded hope in Allah's mercy either, in the absence of actions, right? So Ibn Taymiyyah made that point, important point when it comes to love, right? Love is the asl and the foundation of ibadah. Because from love comes irada, from irada comes haraka, motion. This is the nature. But if you leave that love just by itself, it will lead people to misguidance. So therefore attached to it is fear and hope. Fear of Allah's punishment, fear of Allah's anger, fear of Allah's displeasure on the one hand, and hope in Allah's mercy, hope in Allah's paradise, hope in Allah's forgiveness. So a believer is in between all of these things, right? And upon this, he will remain upon istiqamah. As we said, we mentioned the verse, قُلْ إِن كُنْتُمْ تُحِبُّونَ اللَّهَ فَاتَّبِعُونِي يُحْبِبْكُمُ اللَّهُ وَيَغْفِرْ لَكُمْ ذُنُوبَكُمْ. Right? Ittiba', following the Messenger of Allah in one's ibadah, this is the criterion of genuine, true love. Right? So a person who is upon innovations and misguidance, he can't be truly loving Allah. A person who is engrossed in sin and disobedience, he can't be truly, love Allah Azza wa Jal, right? And making ittiba, right? So it's either innovations, it's shubuhat, or it's shahawat, lusts and desires, right? So ittiba is a criterion of genuine love of Allah Azza wa Jal. And in the Quran, Allah Azza wa Jal, He rebuked the Jews and the Christians because they said, نَحْنُ أَبْنَاءُ اللَّهِ وَأَحِبَّاؤُهُ. We are the children of Allah. We are Allah's children. And we are His beloved. They made this claim. And this is not true. That's why that verse was revealed, in كُنْتُمْ تُحِبُّونَ اللَّهَ فَاتَّبِعُونِي. And they were refuted in that respect. So this... So after this, Ibn Taymiyyah also mentioned that every time a servant increases in his love, he will increase in obedience to Allah, and every time he increases in obedience to Allah, Allah's love of him will increase. This is how it works, right? Every time your love increases, your love of Allah, then naturally your obedience to Allah will increase. And every time your obedience to Allah increases, then Allah's love of you will increase. Right? So what counts is not whether you love Allah. What counts is whether Allah loves you. This is what is reported from some of the Salaf and some of the scholars, that don't look at your claim of love, rather look at whether Allah loves you or not. And the criterion for that is at-ta'ah, obedience, al-ittiba', following and imitating the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. After this, Ibn Taymiyyah also went on to discuss another point, which is that he spoke of how the entire world, ad-dunya mal'una, the world is cursed. Mal'unun ma fiha khala dhikra Allah wa ma walah. This is the hadith of the Messenger of Allah. The world is cursed, whatever is within it is cursed, except the remembrance of Allah and whatever is associated or follows or it is attached to that. So Ibn Taymiyyah, he mentioned that every type of love which is not for Allah or not for the sake of Allah, it is batila. It is false, it is futile. Which means that really everything there is sought and pursued and desired and with love in the world, it is all false and futile, except that which is for Allah. That which is for Allah. That's the meaning of this hadith, right? Which means that everything you should be doing in the life of this world should be based upon a love which is either love of Allah or love for Allah, right? So you love Allah, or it is a love for Allah, for the sake of Allah. And anything which is outside of that, it is batila, mal'una, it is bereft of benefit, devoid of benefit, and it is, cursed as we see, it is futile as we see. So he spoke about that and basically said that, in the life of this world, the greatest of what a believer can have is the love of Allah, and to taste the sweetness of Iman. He mentioned the hadith of the three characteristics that a man, he loves Allah and His Messenger more than he loves anything else, that he does not love a man except for the sake of Allah, and that he hates to revert to disbelief just as he hates to be thrown into the hellfire. That person has tasted the sweetness of Iman, right? And those things are a genuine sign that there is genuine love in the heart. So this was point number 5, and point number 5 was at-tafadul bil iman, that not all the believers are the same. And because we mentioned all those things, a person can be put to trial by many things, attachment to things, wealth, lust, power, authority, leadership, one's needs, and he spoke about many things under this general subject of the believers having variation in their levels of Iman. He spoke about many things under that whole topic. Then finally we come to what he discussed in the book, which is al-farq bayn al-khaliqi wal-makhluq, the difference between the creator and the created. And Ibn Taymiyyah spoke about that towards the end of the book and also in an earlier part as well. And so what happened here is that some of the people of misguidance and deviation, they exaggerated in the issue of love to such a degree, right? They like we said, they took the issue of love by itself and they exaggerated it in such a degree that they did not know what they were worshipping. And they combined between the creator and the created, right? And then they began to speak of certain ideas and certain concepts such as al-fana, which is this notion of perishing. And in the book, Ibn Taymiyyah spoke of 3 types of al-fana, and he said the first of them is al-fana of those who are from the prophets and the messengers, and the second type, which is a type which was entered into by some of the righteous, initially the righteous pious people. And the third one is the fana, which is of the hypocrites and the disbelievers and, the atheists. Right? The atheists are upon this as well. And so as for the first one, fana'ul qusud, which is, where basically every desire which is for other than Allah, it perishes, expires, right? So every desire that is other than Allah, it perishes inside of you. So everything you desire is only the pleasure of Allah. Right? This is a correct meaning. This is true and correct. Right? This is something that we all seek. That every irada, every desire that we have, it is for the sake of Allah, for Allah's pleasure, for the love of Allah, for Allah's pleasure. Right? So we only do that which pleases Him, which is the wajib and the mustahab. Right? And even the mubah, what is mubah? When it is done to please Allah, this becomes worship as well. Right? So this is a correct meaning. The second, fana'u shuhud, is basically where your heart becomes attached to Allah and it abandons attachment to everything other than Allah. And in a way you kind of isolate yourself from the world and your heart becomes empty of anything to do with the world. And this is something that is at the starting point, it appears to be something good. But if you are not someone who is extremely, extremely knowledgeable and extremely grounded in knowledge and intelligent and whatever, you are going to be led astray, somewhere down the line if you attach yourself to this type of, this fana'u shuhud. And that's why you see some of the very early tabi'een, we mentioned al-Fudail, those who came, from the time of the tabi'een to after them, right? There are many famous names, Al-Junayd, Al-Fudail bin Iyad, and Abu Sulaiman, Ad-Darani, and many others. They were known for piety and for abstaining from the world and keeping away from the world and being engrossed in Allah's worship. But they never went astray because they were deeply rooted in knowledge, and they also had knowledge of the world, right? Because they didn't keep away from the world in a blameworthy sense, right? We spoke about zuhud. What is zuhud? Zuhud means to only take from the world what is necessary. That's the meaning of zuhud. Zuhud does not mean to isolate and live in a monastery, right? To lock yourself away from society, the world. This is not zuhud. Zuhud means to only take from the world that which you need. So these early righteous scholars from the tabi'een and those after them, yes, they were like this, right? They were upon zuhud with its true and correct meaning, and they were engrossed in Allah's worship, and they were detached from the world with the true meaning. So, and they were also scholars of the Sharia, so they knew the limits and boundaries of everything, and where the boundary between what is right and what is wrong. So they never fell into any mistakes. As opposed to those who came afterwards, from the Sufis who came afterwards, then they fell into tremendous misguidance. So this second type, its starting point is something good, but it is something that's kind of deficient, and it wasn't really found with the Sahaba radiallahu anhum. The third and final type of al-fana, it is where fana'ul wujud, right? Where the only thing you observe that exists is Allah Himself. Everything is Allah. There's no creator, no created. Everything is all that exists, and it is Allah Himself, right? So this is really the belief of Fir'aun. This is the reality of the belief of Fir'aun. There's no, or the essence of what they are saying, right? There's only this existence. Everything therein is, worshipped, and there are different things which are worshipped, and from the greatest of those who are worshipped, they erect among themselves deities and gods. And Fir'aun took himself to be, or made himself to be, the greatest deity, right? And likewise, the Qaramita, many of the Mutasawwifa, the Sufis, the extreme Sufis, they held this belief as well. There's only the existence. There's only the wujud, nothing else. There's no creator, no created, no distinction between the two. Everything is just one, right? So this is wahdatul wujud, and this is the most, evil doctrine. And they used to say that the tawheed that the prophets and messengers came with, this is just, for the common people, for the ignorant people. As for us people who are smart and intelligent, the people of philosophy who understand these higher truths, then we know that tawheed means the oneness of existence. Wahdatul wujud. There's only one existence. Everything is Allah. Allah is everything, right? And as a result of this, many other things follows. Basically, all religions are valid and true. There's no such thing as the halal and the haram. There's no such thing which is haram, full stop. Therefore, the Sharia becomes invalid and obsolete. No need to adhere to any Sharia, because if everything is Allah, and Allah is everything, then, the worshipper is the worshipped, and the worshipped is the worshipper, and, therefore, all religions are therefore correct, right? So all of this evil arises from all of that. So anyhow, that was the final thing. And finally, the point that we made at the very end that Ibn Taymiyyah discussed, basically, that the entire religion is built upon two principles. We can say this is point number 7. The entire religion is built upon two principles: that we worship none but Allah, Allah na'budu illa Allah, that we do not worship except Allah, and that we do not worship Him except by way of what He legislated. وَلَا نَعْبُدُهُ إِلَّا بِمَا شَرَعَ. Very simple. We worship only Allah, and we worship Him only by way of what He Himself legislated. And anyone who actualizes these two things, then he will remain upon istiqamah. He will remain within the confines of uboodiyyah to Allah Azza wa Jal, so long as he obviously has love in his heart for Allah and makes that love sincere and balances it with fear and hope, right? This is the person, this is, how a person maintains uboodiyyah to Allah Azza wa Jal. So this really is the summary of the entire book of Al-Uboodiyyah in 7 points. Very quickly. First of all, definition of ibadah. Secondly, what is the status and position of ibadah? Thirdly, how do we divide the creation, the creatures of Allah in terms of uboodiyyah? What are the two types of uboodiyyah? Fourthly, how did people go astray in the issue of uboodiyyah, right? And at which points, can they go astray? Because we mentioned the sequence of points, right? As to where they can go astray. You can go astray in the foundation, uboodiyyah kawniyah, limit Islam only to that, tawheed only to that. You can go astray in the issue of al-qadr, where you say, well, we have no choice, we are forced to do whatever we do. You can go astray in the issue of worship itself. You can go astray in the issue of enjoining good, prohibiting evil, and you can go astray in the issue of al-wala wal-bara, right? All of these are mistakes that can be entered into, points at which you can enter into mistakes. Point number 5 was at-tafadul bil-iman, that the believers vary in their level of iman. And Ibn Taymiyyah discussed at length the basis of that. It's what's in the heart of mahabbah, and the heart's attachment to other things, being put to trial to other things. And he discussed that in length, major part of the book. Number 6 is the difference between the creator and the created, and how people erred in that issue. And finally, number 7, what is the essence? How can the essence of the religion be summarized? It's in 2 simple principles: worship none but Allah, and worship Him only by way of what He legislated. So that's the end of the book Al-Uboodiyyah, and so this concludes our series of lessons on this topic. Inshallah ta'ala, we'll conclude there, our lesson there. And so I think what we'll do in the next lesson, we're going to just do cover the topic of the companions, the status of the companions, and what is the correct belief towards the companions. This is taken from a section from At-Tahawi's Creed. So we'll do that in the next lesson, inshallah ta'ala. Then after that topic is completed in one lesson, or maybe two lessons, then inshallah we'll start a new series. We'll announce what that is, inshallah, in the next few days or the next week or so, inshallah ta'ala. So with that, we conclude today's lesson. Walhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen, wa sallallahu ala nabiyyina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in.